Mason Carter sat in silence at the back of the classroom, his pen moving with care. At the top of the paper, bold and unflinching, read the title, Why Yale Needs Me. It wasn't just an essay. It was a declaration. Outside, his mother scrubbed hospital floors to keep the lights on. Inside, Mason was trying to write his way out of every limitation people had thrown at him. Mrs. Thurman's heels clicked across the floor as she entered. Her eyes landed on his page. She leaned in without invitation. A laugh, sharp as broken glass, sliced the air. Yale? Really? She said. Aim for something reachable, Mason. The back row stirred. Colton Hayes raised his eyebrows at Drew Taylor. Guess Yale's letting in janitor kids now, Colton muttered. Drew grinned. I hear custodians are in demand. The snickering echoed. Mason said nothing. He calmly placed the paper in his folder, zipped his backpack, and stood. Mrs. Thurman tilted her head. There's nothing wrong with ambition, she said. But let's be realistic. Community college is a great place to start. He met her gaze. Appreciate the insight. He walked past Colton and Drew. Colton stuck out a foot. Mason sidestepped, unfazed. Elite material right there, Drew sneered. Mason didn't turn back. His steps were measured, unhurried. But the second he cleared the doorway, his shoulders fell for just a breath before he lifted them again. Across town, Dana Carter paused mid-shift to check a buzz on her phone. Rough day. 2 words. From Mason. She could feel the weight behind them. In the break room, she sat quietly, fingers tracing a worn photo. A young man smiled in a Yale hoodie. Her late husband, Warren Carter, Mason's father. Warren never made it to Yale as a student, but he dreamed hard enough for a lifetime. Dana saw that same dream burning in her son. As dusk painted the streets orange, Mason took the long route home, through cracked sidewalks, shuttered shops, and alleys too narrow for safety. He walked with practiced posture, calm, alert, neither a threat nor a victim. He made a quick stop at the library. Mrs. Werner, the librarian, looked up from her desk. Cutting it close, Mason. Just printing something, he said. He pulled up his draft, hit print, and waited as the machine churned out 3 pages. He folded them like they were glass. Back at the apartment, lights off, his mom still at work, Mason fixed a sandwich and dropped his bag on the table. He opened the folder again, but couldn't bring himself to reread the essay. He pushed it aside. That night, long after the janitorial shift had begun, Mr. Jennings moved down the school hallway, mop in hand. He was quiet and fast, not because of age, but because he'd done this work for so long it had become second nature. In Mrs. Thurman's room, he noticed a balled-up paper near the desk Mason had used. Something about the way it had been crushed caught his eye. He smoothed it open, read the title, started reading more, and paused. The language was sharp, honest, raw. This wasn't mimicry. It was lived truth. Mr. Jennings folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his coat. Well, he said softly to the empty room, kid's got something. The next morning, Mason Carter walked into school with the weight of disbelief still settling over him. By third period, he was called to the office. The whispers followed. Principal Morton sat behind his desk, unreadable. Mrs. Thurman was already there, her expression folded into concern too smooth to be genuine. Mason, the principal began, do you know why you're here? No, sir. Without a word, he slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside, Mason's essay and a handful of academic articles, highlighted lines revealing suspicious similarities. This is your Harvard application essay, correct? Mason nodded slowly. Yes, I wrote it. These sections, Mrs. Thurman interjected, tapping the pages, are nearly identical to published materials. That's not possible, Mason said, sitting straighter. I didn't copy anything. I worked on this for weeks. Mr. Jennings has seen my drafts. Drafts can be fabricated after the fact, Mrs. Thurman said. The timing of this, it's troubling. Before Mason could respond, a knock broke the tension. Mr. Jennings stepped into the room, mop in hand, voice calm. Apologies, but I need to speak. Principal Morton frowned. This is a closed disciplinary. I know, but I've seen that boy work every lunch, every morning before the bell, throwing away drafts, scribbling notes. I pulled one of those drafts from the trash myself last week. Mrs. Thurman narrowed her eyes. With all due respect, how would you know what constitutes original academic work? The janitor smiled faintly. I spent 30 years teaching rhetoric before I ever picked up a mop. Silence fell. Principal Morton turned back to his computer, fingers tapping quickly. After a moment, he glanced up. The source file Mrs. Thurman referenced, created just yesterday. Mason exhaled, just slightly. That doesn't prove innocence, Mrs. Thurman said sharply. But it does raise serious doubts, the principal replied. Mason, we're placing you on probation pending further review. You'll remain eligible for classwork, but under scrutiny. Mason nodded, jaw tight. Understood. Outside, Mr. Jennings joined him in the hall. You kept your cool, he said. I shouldn't have to, Mason replied, his voice cracking with frustration. No, you shouldn't, the janitor agreed. But the world doesn't give out fair fights. You earned your place. Don't let them take it. That evening, Dana Carter stood in Mrs. Thurman's classroom, her hospital scrubs exchanged for jeans and a sweater. She looked tired, but steady. You accused my son of cheating, she said, on something he built with his own hands. Mrs. Thurman didn't flinch. There were similarities. I followed protocol. Did you follow your bias? Dana asked. Or just your assumptions about what a black boy from Westwood is capable of? I assess all students equally. No, Dana interrupted. You assess who you expect to succeed, and when someone doesn't fit the mold, you punish them for trying. Mrs. Thurman folded her arms. If you spent more time overseeing his education. Dana stepped closer. My son writes essays while I mop ER floors on overnight shifts. Don't talk to me about oversight. The teacher went quiet. Dana turned to leave. He'll make it. Not because of you, but in spite of you. And when he does, I hope you remember this moment. Back at school, Mason sat on the library steps after hours, journal in hand, scribbling fresh notes. Mr. Jennings joined him. Think you're still in this? I know I am, Mason said. And I've got more to prove now. The janitor grinned. Then we train harder. From across the street, Mrs. Thurman watched from behind the wheel of her car, something shifting behind her eyes. Something not quite regret, but close. Later that week, Mason came home to find his mom sitting at the kitchen table with an old photo album open beside her. Her hospital ID lay on the counter, keys tossed near a grocery bag of off-brand cereal and bread. I've been meaning to show you something, Dana said, flipping to a page with a faded photo. A young man grinned in a black cap and gown, diploma in hand. Is that Dad? Dana nodded. High school graduation. Valedictorian. He had a full ride to state. I thought. Mason sat down. Didn't he go to Yale? She paused before flipping to the next page, an official-looking letter. He was accepted, she said, but he never got to go. Mason scanned the letter, blinking at the Yale header. He'd planned to transfer after a year at state, Dana continued, her voice soft. But I got pregnant. Life changed. He stayed, worked nights, studied when he could. He never let go of that dream, but he never chased it again either. Why didn't you ever tell me? She closed the album gently. Because I wanted you to run your race, not live chasing the one he never finished. At school the next day, Ava caught Mason by his locker. Her usual guarded look was replaced with something resolved. You hear about the citywide essay competition? She asked. He shook his head. Final round is 6 weeks from now. Yale's on the judging panel. Winner gets scholarship and direct review. You should enter. Mason blinked. You think I could win? I think you've already got their attention. This is your chance to turn the noise into proof. Later that day, Mason brought it up to Ms. Bailey, the school counselor. She was pulling up application details when Mrs. Thurman entered the office like a cold breeze. The Yale competition? She said, arching a brow. I wasn't aware you were submitting, Mason. Ms. Bailey smiled. We can nominate 3 students. So far, we've got Tara Bloom and Colton Wright. 1 slot's still open. Mrs. Thurman's lips thinned. Unfortunately, students on academic probation aren't eligible. That's not in the official policy, Ms. Bailey said, frowning. Mrs. Thurman spoke smoothly. It's a matter of discretion. We have to consider the integrity of our representation. Mason stood still, fists clenched. Then let's check with Principal Morton, Ms. Bailey suggested, picking up the phone. 10 minutes later, in the principal's office, the ruling came down. There's no formal restriction, Principal Morton said at last. If Mason wants to apply, he may. But one more incident. Anything questionable, and he's out. Back in the hall, Mr. Jennings gave Mason a nod. Then we double down, he said. We train harder. The next week, Mason poured every spare hour into prep. He studied past winners, dissected arguments, rehearsed until his voice cracked. Even the public library downtown, where the security guard watched him too closely, became a second home. Meanwhile, Colton and Drew watched from the sidelines, bitter and restless. You still got that hookup with Brad? Drew asked. Colton's eyes narrowed. We're not taking chances this time. Let's make sure Carter never even finishes that speech. That afternoon, Brad received a text. Ready to make that glitch happen? Reply, you know it. Mason, deep in a pile of books, had no idea the stage was being set, again. Mason stepped into the gleaming lobby of the Riverside Convention Center, his shoes silent on the polished floors, but the noise in his chest was deafening. Everything around him gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, velvet ropes, voices dripping with generational confidence. His button-down shirt, freshly ironed but clearly not designer, marked him like a label. Colton saw him first. Well, Westwood's scholarship poster boy, he smirked, just loud enough to earn glances from the other contestants. Mason didn't flinch, just kept walking, Mr. Jennings's voice steady in his mind. You don't prove you belong by shrinking. You prove it by standing. In the prep room, students in polished blazers rehearsed essays filled with talk of legacy, travel, and access. Mason sat in the corner, reviewing his final notes, an essay written, not with polish, but with purpose. Carter, you're next, a coordinator called. He stood, his hands steady even if his stomach wasn't. At the curtain's edge, he spotted Principal Morton seated in the audience. But another presence caught him off guard. Mr. Jennings, no mop bucket, no janitor's uniform, just a modest suit and a steady gaze. 2 minutes, the stage manager whispered. A girl on stage wrapped up her pitch on architectural sustainability. The applause was polite. Then came the announcement, Mason Carter, Westwood High. The lights swallowed him. He walked to the podium, unfolded his papers, then froze. The pages were blank. Every single one. A hush fell over the auditorium. In the third row, Colton and Drew leaned in, their smirks unmistakable. Brad, the tech student from school, sat nearby, his face pale, his eyes avoiding Mason's. Mason inhaled slowly. 5 seconds passed. Then, he stepped away from the mic. I'm sorry for the technical issue, he said, voice steady. But maybe it's appropriate. Because this essay, it's not about polish, it's about truth. He looked out at the judges, no paper in hand, no script to cling to. Legacy isn't inherited, he said. It's earned. And sometimes it's born right here, when everything you prepared for is stripped away, and all that's left is who you really are. He spoke from the center of the stage. No notes. Just heart. He talked about his father's unfinished dream, about the pressure of silence, the cost of expectation, and the power of showing up when no one wants you there. We confuse privilege with potential, he said. But struggle teaches you to build when nothing's handed to you. The room leaned in. Even the judges stopped taking notes. I don't come from legacy, Mason said, but I'm here to build one. When he finished, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then, rising applause. Backstage, another student, a girl from Brookside Academy, approached him. That speech, that was wild. That blank paper trick, was that part of your strategy? Mason smiled slightly. That was sabotage. She blinked. Then you're better than I thought. An hour later, the finalists were announced. Mason Carter was among them. As the crowd began to thin, Colton and Drew crossed his path. They looked shaken. Congrats, Colton muttered. Thanks. Drew shifted. The pages. That wasn't supposed to. Don't, Mason said evenly. You taught me something today. Colton squinted. Yeah? What? That your opinion doesn't matter. He walked past them, spine straight, heart full. Mr. Jennings was waiting at the exit. You stayed standing, he said quietly. Mason nodded. Almost lost it. But you didn't. And that's all that matters. Across the street, Miss Thurman sat in her car, watching. She'd come expecting a fall. Instead, she saw something else. A reckoning. And in the shadowed upper balcony, a man in a gray suit took one final note. Mason Carter. Yale. Priority. The morning sun cast a golden stripe across Westwood High's brick entrance as Mason stepped off the bus, his finalist badge from the competition tucked in his pocket like a secret. But it wasn't a secret for long. By second period, students had already seen the anonymous post. A doctored image. Mason in a Harvard sweatshirt, standing next to a mop bucket. The caption read, Ivy League's newest charity case. Like mother, like son. The post had spread like wildfire. In the cafeteria, Jade sat across from Mason, her phone screen showing the image. They're scared of you, she said, voice low. That's what this is. Mason stared at the photo. His chest burned, but not from shame. This crossed a line. He stood up, gathered his bag, and left school without a word. By the time he reached their apartment, his mom was already home. A rare early shift. She was at the table, sorting mail. When she saw his face, she didn't ask questions, just waited. Mason placed his phone on the table, screen up. "Did you know people were going to find out?" "I knew it was possible," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands stilled. "You worked at Yale," he said quietly. "You were a research coordinator. That wasn't just a job. That was a life." She looked down. "It was, until your father died, and I had to make a different one, for you." "But why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you chasing his dream," she said, locking eyes with him. "I wanted you to find your own." He nodded slowly, taking that in. Then he opened the envelope Dean Rivers had sent weeks earlier, tucked away until now. It held an official invitation to a final round interview with the admissions panel. 3 days later, Mason stood outside the Yale Club downtown. His blazer was secondhand, his shoes polished with old t-shirt cloth. He didn't look like most applicants inside, but he wasn't like most applicants. Inside, the room held 6 people seated in a semicircle. One of them was Dean Rivers. Another was Professor Eleanor Winters. Sharp eyes, silver bun, zero patience for fluff. "Mr. Carter," she said, "let's begin." The questions were immediate, pointed. Ethics, law, leadership under pressure. But Mason didn't flinch. He spoke about equity in education, about the danger of inherited advantage, and the power of unexpected mentorship. "Who is your greatest influence?" someone asked. He glanced to the back, where Mr. Jennings sat in a simple black suit. "A janitor who taught me more about rhetoric than any textbook ever could." That earned silence. Professor Winters flipped a page. "One final question. What do you say to those who believe you're only here because of sympathy?" Mason held her gaze. "Sympathy doesn't get you this far. It doesn't write essays. It doesn't memorize speeches. It doesn't stand on stage with blank pages and still find your voice." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here because someone gave me a pass. I'm here because I walked through a door no one thought I had the right to knock on." As he stood to leave, Dean Rivers offered a rare smile. "Mason," he said, "you'll want to keep your phone on tonight." Back at school, Principal Morton called an emergency meeting. Evidence had surfaced, text messages between Colton and Drew detailing the essay sabotage and social media smear campaign. In front of the entire board, Colton's father tried to downplay it. It was just kids being kids. But Morton, for once, didn't flinch. "Not in my school," he said. Colton and Drew were suspended. Mrs. Thurman placed on administrative leave. And the students who once sneered now whispered something new. Respect. The buzz started before sunrise. A Yale press release announced the 5 students selected for the university's new Voices of Change scholarship. Mason Carter was on the list, front and center. By the time he arrived at Westwood, classmates were already crowding his locker, phones out, questions flying. The boy who used to eat alone had become a headline. But Mason wasn't focused on the noise. He was thinking about his mom, how she'd stared at that scholarship letter for 10 minutes before smiling. Really smiling. For the first time in years. At lunch, Jade sat beside him with her tray. "You broke the algorithm," she said with a smirk. He laughed. "Is that what this is?" She nudged him. "Whatever it is, it's big." Later that afternoon, a surprise assembly was called. The gym buzzed with speculation, until Principal Morton stepped onto the stage, flanked by Dean Malcolm Rivers and a projection screen bearing one name, Mason Carter. The students quieted instantly. "Today," Morton began, "we acknowledge a milestone not just for a student, but for this school." He turned toward Mason, who stood awkwardly in the wings. "Mason Carter is the first Westwood student in 2 decades to be accepted into an Ivy League university with a full scholarship. But more than that, he's shown us what grace under fire looks like." The screen behind them flicked to life, footage of Mason's competition speech. His voice echoed through the gym. "Legacy isn't handed down. It's built." The gym erupted into applause. Afterward, Mr. Jennings found him in the hallway. "That speech reminded me why I used to teach." "You did more than mop floors," Mason said. "You built a bridge." Jennings smiled faintly. "And you walked across it." A week later, Mason stood at his graduation ceremony in a pressed blazer and a borrowed tie. When his name was called, the entire auditorium stood. Ms. Thurman was nowhere in sight. Colton sat in the back row, stiff in his seat. His father's connections had shielded him from expulsion, but his reputation had crumbled. Drew had transferred mid-semester. And Jade, she was right beside Mason as he gave his speech. "Success," Mason said into the mic, "isn't about what people expect of you. It's about what you expect of yourself, even when no one else sees it. He didn't mention Yale. He didn't have to. That summer, a new sign went up near the front office. The Jennings Fellowship, honoring unseen mentors. And one early September morning, Mason Carter stepped through the gates of Yale. The buildings loomed around him, old stone, sharp shadows, unfamiliar rhythm, but he didn't hesitate. In his bag, he carried two things: his mother's lucky stone and a dog-eared copy of his father's old ethics framework, rediscovered by Yale researchers and now part of their curriculum. His first class was in Hamilton Hall. He arrived early, sat in the front, took out a pen. He didn't just want to learn. He wanted to change the room. As the professor entered, Mason glanced at his phone. One last message from Mr. Jennings. "You already belong. Now make them realize it." Mason smiled, then turned his attention to the board. This was only the beginning.